"You're lucky to marry a man like me," Julian declared, voice full of pride, raising his glass at a glittering Manhattan gala. Imani smiled. Then, calmly, without blinking, she took off her diamond ring, placed it on the marble table, and said, "Time to settle a debt. This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning." Imani, the elegant woman they thought they owned, was never just Julian's wife. Though she bore his name, she was treated as less, spoken over, sidelined, silenced. But tonight, her silence ends. Because Imani isn't here to belong. She's here to reclaim. If you're watching this right now, no matter where you're from or what time it is, subscribe, tell us where you're tuning in from, and stay to the very end. You won't forget Imani, Washington. The chandelier lights of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Grand Hall glittered like a constellation of diamonds suspended in midair, casting a golden haze over the sea of tuxedos and couture gowns. It was one of those New York evenings where the elite gathered under the guise of charity, their laughter echoing off marble walls adorned with priceless artifacts. Crystal glasses clinked, whispers of deals and dalliances floated like perfume in the air, and the faint strains of a string quartet wove through the conversations. At the center of it all stood Julian Davenport, the undisputed king of private equity, his broad shoulders filling out a bespoke tuxedo that screamed old money even if his fortune was self-made. At 35, with his sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that could seal a multi-million-dollar deal, Julian was the epitome of success, arrogant, magnetic, and utterly convinced of his own invincibility. He ascended the makeshift stage with the confidence of a man who had conquered boardrooms and broken competitors without breaking a sweat. The award in his hand, a gleaming crystal obelisk engraved with Philanthropist of the Year, was just another trophy to add to his collection. The crowd applauded politely as he gripped the podium, his voice booming through the microphone with that practiced charm. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this honor. In a city like New York, where fortunes rise and fall like the tide, it's humbling to be recognized for giving back." He paused, letting the applause swell again, his eyes scanning the room like a predator surveying his domain. Then his gaze landed on her. Imani Washington, his wife of 5 years, stood near the edge of the stage, a vision of understated elegance in a floor-length black gown that hugged her slender frame without ostentation. At 28, her warm brown skin glowed under the lights, her long hair falling in gentle waves that framed her face like a modern halo, sleek, controlled, yet effortlessly graceful. She wasn't one to chase the spotlight. Instead, she lingered in its periphery, her dark eyes observing everything with a quiet intensity that few ever noticed. Julian pointed at her dramatically, his grin widening. "And of course, I must thank my beautiful wife, Imani. She's the one who keeps me grounded. Honestly, darling, you're lucky to marry me." The words hung in the air, laced with that faux humility he wielded like a weapon. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, awkward, forced, the kind that masked discomfort rather than genuine amusement. A few women exchanged glances, their smiles tight. A man in the back coughed into his fist. Imani didn't flinch. Her lips curved into a serene smile, one that reached her eyes but revealed nothing of the storm brewing beneath. Her fingers, adorned only with the massive diamond ring Julian had given her on their wedding day, lightly touched the heirloom pin fastened to her bodice, a delicate gold brooch etched with intricate African motifs, a subtle nod to a heritage she kept locked away. To the onlookers, she was the perfect trophy wife, poised, silent, a beautiful accessory to Julian's empire. But inside, her heart beat steadily, a rhythm honed by years of patience. Lucky? The word echoed in her mind like a distant thunderclap. If only they knew. If only he knew. As the applause died down and Julian descended the stage to a flurry of handshakes and backslaps, Imani slipped away from the throng. The gala's opulence felt suffocating now, the scent of expensive colognes mingling with floral arrangements, the murmur of conversations about stock portfolios and summer homes. She navigated the crowd with graceful precision, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, until she reached the sanctuary of the ladies' room. It was a lavish space, all marble counters and gilded mirrors, empty save for the faint hum of an air vent. She locked herself in a stall, her breath even, her movements deliberate. From the hidden pocket sewn into her gown, a modification she'd made herself, Imani pulled out a cheap burner phone. Its screen cracked but functional. No apps, no contacts, just a single number programmed in. Her thumbs flew across the keys with practiced ease. The kiln is ready. She hit send, the message vanishing into the ether, destined for Mr. Ellis, the quiet guardian of her secrets. Tucking the phone away, she leaned against the cool wall, her eyes closing for a brief moment. The kiln, a metaphor for the fire she'd been stoking in secret, the forge where her art and her revenge were born. It wasn't about destruction, it was about reclamation, about turning the ashes of her family's legacy into something unbreakable. Outside, the gala continued its merry facade. Julian was already deep in conversation with a potential investor, his laughter booming as he recounted another conquest. Davenport Capital doesn't just acquire companies, he boasted. We transform them. He glanced around for Imani, assuming she'd be waiting dutifully at his side, but she was nowhere in sight. A flicker of irritation crossed his face, brief, unnoticed, but he shrugged it off. She was his, after all. Lucky to have him. Imani emerged from the restroom moments later, her composure flawless. She rejoined the crowd, accepting compliments on her gown with polite nods, her smile never wavering. But as she stood beside Julian once more, her hand lightly on his arm, she felt the weight of the pin against her chest like a talisman. It had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who had built Washington Pottery from nothing in the heart of Charleston, turning clay into art that whispered stories of resilience and heritage. Julian had shattered that world 7 years ago, his firm's hostile takeover, reducing generations of black craftsmanship to a line item on a balance sheet. Her father's stroke, Marcus's shattered dreams, they were all casualties of his ambition. And yet, here she was, playing the role he'd scripted for her, the quiet, grateful wife. The evening wore on with toasts and auctions, the charity's coffers swelling while egos inflated. Imani bid on a small sculpture, a modern piece evoking African pottery techniques, winning it with a subtle raise of her paddle. Julian beamed, whispering in her ear, "See, I told you, you're lucky." She nodded, her eyes meeting his with that same enigmatic calm. But in her mind, the kiln burned brighter. The message to Mr. Ellis was the signal. Her anonymous art under the pseudonym Kai had reached its pinnacle. The funds amassed, the pieces in place. Soon Julian would learn that luck had nothing to do with it. This marriage wasn't a gift, it was collateral. And the debt he owed her family? It was time to collect. As the night drew to a close, couples drifted toward the exits, limousines idling outside like sleek black beasts. Julian slipped his arm around Imani's waist, pulling her close. "Great night, darling. Let's celebrate properly at home." She leaned into him, her wave-like hair brushing his shoulder, but her thoughts were far away, in a Brooklyn studio where clay spun on a wheel, shaping futures. The gala's lights dimmed behind them, but for Imani, the real show was just beginning. A debt settled not in whispers, but in fire and revelation. As the limousine glided through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon outside the tinted windows. Imani Washington stared at the heirloom pin in her palm. The gold caught the faint glow from passing street lamps, its intricate etchings, a stylized wheel and flame, symbols of creation and endurance, whispering secrets from a life she'd buried deep. Julian sat beside her, scrolling through emails on his phone, oblivious to the storm raging in her mind. "That award speech went off without a hitch," he murmured, not looking up. "You were perfect up there, darling. Quiet, supportive, just how I like it." Imani slipped the pin back into her pocket, her fingers lingering on its warmth. Quiet, supportive. The words echoed like chains, pulling her back to the beginning. To the day everything shattered 7 years ago in the sun-drenched fields of Charleston, South Carolina. The air in Charleston had always carried the earthy scent of clay and kiln smoke, a comforting haze that enveloped the Washington Pottery compound like a protective shroud. Founded by Imani's great-grandmother in the aftermath of Reconstruction, the workshop was more than a business. It was a testament to Black resilience. where generations turned red Carolina earth into vessels of art and history. Bowls etched with Adinkra symbols from West Africa, vases swirling with patterns inspired by Gullah Geechee folklore. The pieces weren't just sold, they told stories of survival, migration, and unyielding creativity. Imani's father, Elijah Washington, ran it with a steady hand, his calloused fingers shaping clay as if communing with ancestors. At 50, he was a pillar, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that boomed like thunder, and eyes that sparkled with pride whenever Imani, then 21, joined him at the wheel. Her younger foster brother, Marcus, just 15 and already sketching grand designs for expanding the studio into a community center, trailed behind them like an eager shadow. "One day, sis," Marcus would say, his pencil flying across paper, "we'll build something that lasts forever." But forever proved fragile when Davenport Capital set its sights on them. Julian Davenport, then a rising star at 28, fresh from Ivy League polish and hungry for his first big kill, led the charge. His firm specialized in hostile takeovers, swooping in on vulnerable companies, exploiting legal loopholes, and stripping them for parts. Washington Pottery, despite its cultural significance, was drowning in a sea of modernization costs, outdated equipment, rising land taxes, and a market flooded with cheap imports. Julian saw an opportunity in the vulnerability. "It's not personal," he'd later claim in boardroom justifications, but to Imani, it was the epitome of erasure. A white man's empire devouring a black family's legacy without a second glance. The assault began subtly. Anonymous investors buying up minor debts, whispers of rezoning the land for luxury condos. Elijah fought back, rallying community support and seeking loans. But Julian's team was relentless. They unearthed a forgotten easement clause in the property deeds, a relic from the Jim Crow era that allowed external claims on the land. Lawsuits flew, each one chipping away at the family's resolve. Imani remembered the night it escalated, her father poring over documents at the kitchen table, his forehead creased with worry lines that seemed to deepen by the hour. "They're vultures, baby girl," he'd muttered, his voice cracking. "They don't see the soul in this place. Just dollars." Marcus, wide-eyed and furious, slammed his sketchbook down. "We can fight them, Dad. I'll design a new layout, make it untouchable." But the final blow came swiftly. Davenport Capital orchestrated a forced auction, outbidding local preservationists with cold efficiency. Julian himself signed the papers, his signature a slashing mark that sealed the fate of generations. The workshop's kilns went cold. The wheels stopped spinning. Workers, many of whom had been with the family for decades, were laid off with paltry severance. Elijah, overwhelmed by the betrayal and the mounting debts, collapsed in the empty studio one sweltering afternoon. A massive stroke that left him wheelchair-bound, his once vibrant spirit dimmed to a flicker. Marcus, on the cusp of a full-ride scholarship to a top architecture school, had to abandon his dreams to help care for their father, taking odd jobs that dulled his spark. Imani, fresh out of art school, watched it all unravel, her hands meant for sculpting beauty, clenched in helpless rage. In the ruins of that day, as bulldozers razed the old buildings to make way for sterile developments, Imani made her vow, not in tears, but in steel. She stood amid the dust, clutching the heirloom pin her father had given her, and whispered to the wind, "I'll take it back, not with fury, but with faith." Mr. Ellis, her father's old white business partner, a shrewd, silver-haired strategist in his late 40s, who'd always treated the Washingtons like family, pulled her aside. "We can rebuild, Imani, but smarter. Use their game against them." Together they hatched the plan. Imani would infiltrate Julian's world, posing as the unassuming artist he could mold. Her quiet grace would be her weapon, her hidden talent the forge. She changed her last name slightly in public records, bearing her connection to the fallen pottery empire, and set her sights on the man who had stolen it all. Back in the limousine, the memory faded like smoke from a dying fire. Julian pocketed his phone, leaning over to kiss her cheek. "You're awfully quiet tonight. Thinking about that sculpture you bid on?" Imani nodded, her wave-like hair shifting softly. "Something like that." In truth, her mind burned with the kiln's heat, the secret studio in Brooklyn where, under the alias Kai, She channeled her pain into art that commanded fortunes. The pieces sold anonymously, funds funneled into a trust managed by Mr. Ellis, building an arsenal for the day of reckoning. Julian had no idea that the woman beside him wasn't his lucky charm. She was his undoing. As the car pulled up to their penthouse, Imani glanced at her reflection in the window. Serene, unbreakable. The debt was long overdue, and soon the flames would rise. The penthouse loomed high above the city, a glass and steel eyrie where Julian's empire felt untouchable. As the elevator doors whispered open, Imani stepped into the sterile expanse of white marble and minimalist art. Julian's domain, where every surface gleamed with calculated perfection. He tossed his jacket over a chair, loosening his tie with a satisfied sigh. Home, sweet home. Pour us some wine, darling? We deserve it after that triumph. Imani nodded, her movements fluid as she crossed to the bar. But her mind was elsewhere, ignited by the memories of Charleston's fall. The kiln's fire wasn't just a metaphor. It was her reality, burning in a hidden corner of Brooklyn under the veil of Kai. As Julian settled into the leather sofa, oblivious, she handed him a glass, her fingers brushing his. To us, he toasted. She clinked her glass lightly, sipping nothing. Tonight, like so many others, she'd wait until he slept to slip away into her true self. In the dead of night, while Julian snored softly in their king-size bed, Imani moved like a shadow. She changed into simple black leggings and a hoodie, her long hair tied back in a loose ponytail that let the gentle waves cascade down her back. The burner phone buzzed once, a confirmation from Mr. Ellis. The studio was clear. She took the service elevator down, hailing a nondescript cab that ferried her across the bridge to Brooklyn's industrial fringes. The neighborhood was a labyrinth of graffiti-splashed warehouses and flickering streetlights, far from the gala's glamour. Her studio was nestled in a forgotten loft, its entrance marked only by a rusted door with a keypad lock. Inside, the air thickened with the damp, mineral tang of clay, a scent that wrapped around her like an old friend's embrace. Fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, illuminating shelves lined with half-formed vessels, glazes in jewel tones, and the centerpiece. A massive kiln, its door sealed shut, humming with latent heat. This was where Kai was born, not from whimsy but from the ashes of Washington Pottery. Imani had chosen the pseudonym carefully, an acronym for Kiln of Ancestral Inheritance, a nod to the fire that forged her family's legacy. Under this alias, she crafted pieces that blended ancient African techniques, coiling methods from the Yoruba, burnishing inspired by Zulu pottery, with sleek, modern forms. A vase might twist like a DNA helix, its surface etched with fractal patterns, echoing Adinkra symbols for strength and wisdom, glazed in iridescent blacks and golds that shifted under light like living skin. These weren't mere decorations. They were statements, vessels holding stories of displacement and defiance. Critics whispered about Kai in hushed tones at underground galleries, an enigmatic artist who never showed their face, whose works fetched six figures at private auctions. Sotheby's had hosted one such event last month, where a single bowl, symbolizing rebirth from ruin, sold for $250,000 to an anonymous buyer in Dubai. Imani sank her hands into a fresh lump of red clay on the potter's wheel, the motor whirring to life beneath her palms. Her fingers, strong and precise from years of practice, centered the mass, pulling it upward into a graceful cylinder. The clay yielded to her touch, cool and malleable, a stark contrast to the rigid world Julian imposed. Here, in this sanctuary, she wasn't his lucky wife. She was the architect of her own fate. Mr. Ellis had been instrumental from the start. The older man, with his wire-rimmed glasses and unassuming demeanor, had funneled her early sales into a complex trust. Offshore accounts, shell companies, all untraceable to Imani Davenport. "It's not revenge," he'd said during their first meeting after the takeover, his voice steady in a Charleston cafe. "It's restitution. Build your empire in the shadows, then strike when the light hits." Now he managed the logistics, coordinating with discreet galleries, laundering the profits into investments that grew like vines over Julian's oblivious empire. As the piece took shape, a wide-mouthed urn with subtle ridges evoking the scars of history, Imani's phone lit up on the workbench. It was Marcus, her foster brother, calling from his cramped apartment in Charleston. She wiped her hands on a rag, answering via video. His face appeared young and earnest at 21, his messy brown hair tousled as if he'd been sketching late. "Hey, sis, burning the midnight oil again?" He grinned, but his eyes held the weariness of deferred dreams, the architecture scholarship abandoned to care for their father. Imani leaned against the wheel, her wave-like hair framing her face in the screen's glow. "Always. How's Dad?" Marcus sighed, glancing off camera. "Same. Wheelchair-bound, but his spirit's there. He asks about you every day." A pause hung between them, heavy with unspoken loss. "Imani, when are you coming home? This plan of yours. It's been years." She glanced at the kiln, where her latest batch cooled. Pieces destined for another auction, funds earmarked for the Trust's growing war chest. "Soon, Marcus, I promise. KAI is exploding. Sales are through the roof. With Ellis's help, we're close to having enough to buy back the land, redesign it your way." His eyes lit up, the architect in him stirring. "I've got blueprints ready, a modern center, workshops for kids, exhibits on our history. No more takeovers." Imani's voice softened, laced with the faith her name embodied. "It's not just about money. It's healing what was stolen. Julian thinks I'm lucky, but he'll learn. We're the ones who shape our destiny." Marcus nodded, his faith in her unwavering. "Be careful, sis. Love you." The call ended, leaving Imani alone with the hum of the studio. Her motivation crystallized here, not greed, but restoration. The Trust wasn't a hoard. It was a bridge to reclaim Washington Pottery, to give Marcus his future, her father peace. Dawn crept in through grimy windows as Imani sealed the urn for firing. She locked up, the cab ride back a blur of city awakening. Slipping into bed beside Julian, who stirred but didn't wake, she felt the divide widen. He murmured in his sleep about deals, unaware that across the world, in Dubai's opulent boardrooms, whispers of Kai echoed. A royal investor had demanded exclusive pieces for a luxury hotel project. Julian's latest venture. Little did he know, the artist he would soon hunt was the woman sharing his sheets. The kiln was ready, and the hunt was about to begin. The first rays of morning sun pierced the penthouse blinds, casting long shadows across the rumpled sheets where Julian stirred, his dreams of conquest fading into the haze of wakefulness. He reached out instinctively, his hand finding the cool emptiness beside him. Imani had risen early as she often did, brewing coffee in the kitchen with that quiet efficiency he took for granted. "Good morning," she said softly, handing him a mug as he shuffled in, his hair tousled, eyes still sharp with ambition. Her long hair fell in gentle waves over her shoulders, framing a face that betrayed nothing of the night's secrets. Julian kissed her cheek absently, his mind already racing to the day's battles. "Big call with Dubai today. This hotel deal could be my legacy." Imani nodded, her smile serene. Legacy. The word hung between them like smoke, but Julian was too preoccupied to notice. As he dressed in a crisp suit, phone buzzing with emails, he had no inkling that the whispers of Kai from those opulent boardrooms were about to pull him into a hunt that would unravel everything. By midday, Julian sat in his corner office at Davenport Capital, a fortress of glass overlooking the Hudson, where deals were forged and rivals crushed. The video conference with Sheikh Al Mansour flickered to life on the massive screen. The royal investor's face stern amid the backdrop of Dubai's glittering skyline. "Mr. Davenport, the project is promising," the sheikh intoned, his voice laced with authority. "But the lobby must embody cultural fusion, exclusive works from KREI. No substitutes. Secure them, or we walk." Julian's jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. He'd heard of Kai, the elusive artist whose pottery commanded cult status among the ultra-wealthy, but anonymity bred frustration for a man like him, accustomed to owning what he desired. "Consider it done," he replied smoothly, ending the call with a forced smile. But inside, obsession ignited. Who was this Kai? A ghost in the art world, pieces appearing at auctions without a face or footprint. Julian thrived on control. This enigma was a challenge, a prey to be tracked and claimed. He wasted no time. Dialing his assistant, he barked orders. Get me the best private investigators. I want everything on KAI. Identity, location, leverage. Within hours, a team from Elite Investigations arrived, led by a grizzled ex-FBI agent named Harlan, his face etched with years of shadows. We'll start with the supply chain, Harlan explained, spreading dossiers across the conference table. Rare clays from specific quarries, glazes imported from niche suppliers. Artists like this leave trails even if they hide. Julian leaned forward, his blue eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Find them. Offer a fortune if needed. This isn't just art. It's my deal. As the investigators dispersed, Julian paced his office. The city sprawled below a chessboard he dominated. But for the first time in years, doubt crept in. What if Kai refused? The thought fueled his resolve. He would possess those pieces, just as he possessed everything else, including the woman who now texted him from home. Dinner at 8? He replied affirmatively, unaware that the hunt was circling closer to his own bed. Days blurred into a frenzy of leads. Harlan's team traced shipments of Ethiopian black clay, prized for its deep hues, to a distributor in New Jersey, then onward to anonymous P.O. boxes in Brooklyn. It's a dead end on paper, Harlan reported via encrypted video, his voice gravelly. But we staked out the drop points, caught an older guy picking up crates, white, mid-50s, drives a nondescript sedan. Photos flashed on Julian's screen. Mr. Ellis captured mid-stride outside a warehouse, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting, expression guarded. Julian frowned. The man looked vaguely familiar, like a face from a forgotten merger, but he shook it off. Dig deeper. Follow him. Harlan nodded. Already on it. He leads to a loft in Bushwick, an industrial spot with no signage. We couldn't get inside, but a drone caught heat signatures from what looks like a kiln. And this. Another image, a crumpled sketch fluttering from Ellis's pocket during a wind gust, snapped mid-fall. It depicted a swirling vase design, bold lines evoking ancient motifs fused with modern abstraction. Julian zoomed in, a strange familiarity tugging at him, like something he'd glimpsed in Imani's old notebooks back when they first met. But no, impossible. She was no artist. She was his anchor, his luck. Tension mounted as the trail heated. Julian's obsession bled into his nights, his sleep fractured by visions of elusive clay forms mocking him. At home, Imani noticed the shift, his distracted kisses, the late hours poring over files. Everything okay with the Dubai project? She asked one evening over candlelit dinner, her voice a gentle probe. He waved it off, forcing a grin. Just chasing a ghost artist. Kai. Ever heard of them? Her eyes flickered imperceptibly, but she shook her head, hair swaying like a veil. Sounds intriguing. Inside, her pulse quickened. The net was closing, but her plan held firm. Mr. Ellis had warned her via burner text. They're sniffing around. Stay low. She did, her studio visits curtailed, pieces shipped under triple aliases. Harlan's breakthrough came on a rainy afternoon. The loft's active at odd hours, he reported, emailing surveillance footage. Blurry figures moved inside, shadows at the wheel, flames dancing in the kiln's glow. But the real prize, a partial license plate on Ellis's car, tracing back to an old Charleston address linked to Washington Pottery. Julian's blood ran cold. The name rang a bell. A minor acquisition years ago, a pottery outfit he'd flipped for land value. Coincidence? He slammed his fist on the desk, the puzzle pieces scattering in his mind. I need more. Get inside if you have to. But Harlan hesitated. Boss, this feels layered. The guy's connected. Old business ties. Maybe we need a different angle. Julian's eyes narrowed. A different angle. He knew just the man. Caleb Vance, his former partner, ousted in a brutal boardroom coup. Caleb hated him, but hatred could be bought or exploited. As Julian dialed Caleb's number, the hunt intensified, blind to the trap it was walking into. The prey wasn't Kai, it was him. The rain had stopped, leaving Brooklyn streets slick and shimmering under the sodium glow of streetlights. Julian Davenport gripped the steering wheel of his sleek black Mercedes, his jaw tight as he navigated the labyrinth of warehouses in Bushwick. The address Caleb Vance had slipped him, an old loft, no signage, just a rusted door, burned in his mind like a brand. Caleb, the former partner Julian had buried years ago in a ruthless boardroom maneuver, had been cagey over the phone, his voice dripping with barely concealed resentment. "You want Ki? This is where you'll find answers. Don't say I never did you a favor." Julian hadn't trusted him, not fully, but desperation drove him here alone, his investigators' leads too slow to satisfy his obsession. The Dubai deal hung by a thread, and Ki was the key. As he parked in the shadows, the engine's low hum fading, he felt the thrill of the hunt, a predator closing in. But the air carried an unease he couldn't name, like a scent of clay and fire that stirred a buried memory. Inside the penthouse hours earlier, Imani Washington had sensed the shift. Julian's distraction had grown feverish, his questions about Kay sharper, his eyes scanning her as if seeing her anew. She'd kept her mask intact, serene, unassuming, while her burner phone buzzed with Mr. Ellis's warning, "He's close. Tonight's the night." Her long hair, falling in gentle waves, framed her face as she nodded to herself in the dim kitchen light, stealing for the moment she'd orchestrated for years. The kiln was ready, and so was she. Now, as Julian approached the studio, Imani was already there, having slipped out while he thought she slept. The trap was set, its jaws hidden in the fire of her art. Julian approached the rusted door, its keypad glowing faintly. No lock could stop him. Caleb had provided a code, likely stolen, but Julian didn't care. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell that smelled of damp brick and something warmer, earthier. His polished loafers echoed on the concrete steps as he ascended, heart pounding with anticipation. The loft opened before him, a cavern of soft light and raw creation. Exposed beams crisscrossed the ceiling, and shelves groaned under the weight of clay vessels, urns, bowls, vases, their surfaces shimmering with glazes that seemed to pulse with life. At the room's heart stood a massive kiln, its door ajar, embers glowing like a dragon's breath. And there, beside it, stood Imani. She wore a simple linen apron streaked with clay, her hands dusted white, her hair loose and catching the light like a halo of defiance. For a moment, Julian froze, his mind struggling to reconcile the sight. His wife, his quiet, lucky wife, stood in the epicenter of Kai's world. Behind her, carved into a wooden plaque on the brick wall, was the logo of Washington Pottery, a wheel in flame, identical to the heirloom pin she'd worn at the gala. The realization hit like a physical blow, his breath catching as the pieces snapped together. "You?" he whispered, voice hoarse. "You're Kai?" Imani turned slowly, her dark eyes meeting his without a trace of fear. "Always have been," she said, her voice steady, resonant with the weight of years. She stepped toward a workbench, picking up a half-finished vase, its surface etched with patterns that echoed the ones Julian had seen in Harlan's surveillance photos. "You hunted me, Julian, but you never saw me." Her words were calm, deliberate, slicing through his shock like a blade. He staggered forward, anger flaring over disbelief. "This whole time? The art? The money? Washington Pottery? You knew?" Her lips curved into a faint smile, not mocking but resolute. "I knew everything. 7 years ago you tore my family apart, took our legacy, our land, our soul. My father's stroke, Marcus's dreams. You didn't just buy a business, Julian. You erased us." She set the vase down, its thud against the wood punctuating her words. "So I rebuilt, in secret, in shadows. Every piece I made as KII was a step toward taking it back." Julian's hands clenched, his mind racing to reclaim control. "You lied to me, married me under false pretenses. You think you can just—" He stopped, his eyes darting to the logo, to the kiln, to the woman who suddenly seemed a stranger. The Charleston deal flooded back. A minor acquisition, a pottery outfit flipped for profit. He hadn't known her then, hadn't connected the unassuming artist he'd met at a gallery opening to the family he'd crushed. But now the truth was undeniable. "You played me," he said, voice low, dangerous. Imani didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her presence commanding the space. You played yourself. You saw what you wanted. A quiet girl, a trophy. You never asked who I was. Never cared. Her fingers brushed the edge of the kiln, its heat radiating. This is my fire, Julian. My family's fire. And it's about to burn through everything you built. His face twisted, a mix of rage and betrayal. He lunged toward the workbench, grabbing a sketch, swirls and symbols that matched the ones haunting his files. I'll expose you. Dubai, the auctions, all of it. You can't hide anymore. But Imani's gaze held steady, unflappable. Expose me. Go ahead. The world loves KI. They'll love the story of a woman reclaiming her heritage even more. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. But you, Julian? What will they think of the man who destroyed it? The loft seemed to close in, the air thick with the weight of her words. Julian's hands shook, his empire's foundation cracking under the revelation. He'd come to hunt a ghost, but the prey was his wife, and the trap was hers. As he stood speechless, Imani turned back to the kiln, her silhouette framed by its glow. Go home, Julian, she said without looking back. We'll finish this there. He stumbled out, the night air cold against his skin, the logo burned into his mind. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur, fury and fear warring within him. Imani, meanwhile, locked the studio, her heart steady. The confrontation awaited, the moment when the ring would come off, when the debt would be named. The kiln's fire had forged her resolve, and now it would light the way to retribution. The penthouse lights burned like accusatory stars as Julian burst through the door, his coat flung aside like a discarded skin. The drive from Brooklyn had been a maelstrom, rain-smeared windows mirroring the chaos in his mind. The Washington Pottery logo searing his vision like a brand. How had he missed it? Imani, his wife, the architect of Kai, the ghost he'd hunted, betrayal coiled in his chest, hot and venomous, twisting every memory of her quiet smiles into mockery. He stormed into the living room, the city skyline mocking him through floor-to-ceiling windows, a kingdom now teetering on lies. Imani, he bellowed, his voice echoing off the cold marble. She was already there, waiting in the dim glow of a single lamp. Seated on the edge of the sofa, her posture impeccable, she wore a simple white blouse and slacks, her long hair cascading in gentle waves that caught the light like silk threads of fate. At 28, she looked ethereal, untouchable, a far cry from the clay-streaked artist he'd confronted in the studio. But her eyes, dark and unyielding, held the same fire. You're home, she said calmly, as if greeting him from a routine day at the office. No fear, no apology, just that serene composure that now infuriated him. Julian loomed over her, his fists clenched at his sides. Home? This is a farce. All of it. You, us, everything. His words erupted like gunfire, pacing the room like a caged animal. Washington Pottery? That was you? Your family? You slithered into my life, married me, all to... What? Destroy me from the inside? He laughed bitterly, a harsh bark that masked the hurt blooming beneath his rage. I gave you everything. The penthouse, the galas, the life you never deserved. You were nothing, a quiet girl from nowhere. You owe me. You should be grateful for the scraps I threw your way. The air thickened, charged with the storm of his accusations. Imani didn't rise, didn't recoil. She watched him unravel, her expression a mask of quiet power, the heirloom pin now fastened to her blouse like a badge of honor. Memories flashed in her mind, the bulldozers tearing through Charleston soil, her father's broken form in the hospital bed, Marcus's sketches crumpled in defeat. Julian's words were echoes of the entitlement that had shattered them, arrogant, blind. But she had waited for this, forged in the kiln of patience. Grateful? She echoed softly, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. For what, Julian? For stealing my family's soul? For turning our art into your profit margins? He whirled on her, face flushed, veins bulging in his neck. It was business, not personal. You knew that when you said, I do. You lied, every kiss, every night. This marriage, it's built on deceit. He advanced, towering over her, but she met his gaze without blinking, her calm a fortress he couldn't breach. The penthouse felt smaller, the walls closing in as his world fractured. You'll pay for this. I'll drag you through courts, take every cent from your little art scam. You're nothing without me. For the first time, Imani's lips curved into a true smile. Not the polite facade she'd worn for years, but something deeper, laced with triumph. It chilled him, that smile, like a predator revealing its teeth. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her left hand, the 10-carat diamond catching the light in a mocking sparkle. You think I owe you? She said, her voice steady, resonant. You said I was lucky to marry you, but luck had nothing to do with it, Julian. This marriage was never a gift. It was collateral. Her fingers twisted the ring free, the metal whispering against her skin. She held it up, then placed it on the marble coffee table with a soft, final click that echoed like a gavel's fall. Julian stared, transfixed, as if the ring's removal had severed some invisible chain. What are you doing? He demanded, his voice cracking for the first time. Imani's eyes locked on his, cold and unyielding. Settling a debt, the one you owe my family, for the land you stole, the lives you broke. Time to pay up. The words hung in the air, a declaration of war wrapped in quiet certainty. She rose then, graceful as ever, stepping past him toward the window. The city sprawled below, indifferent to their unraveling. Julian lunged for the ring, clutching it like a talisman, but it felt cold, lifeless in his palm. You can't just walk away. We're married. You're mine. She turned, her silhouette framed by the glittering skyline, a queen surveying a fallen kingdom. Married? On your terms, perhaps, but I've been free all along. Her voice softened, almost pitying. You never knew me, Julian. You saw a trophy, not a woman with fire in her veins. The revelation hit him anew. The studio, the art, the trust fund swelling in secret. How much had she amassed? Enough to challenge him. Panic mingled with his fury, a toxic brew that left him reeling. He collapsed onto the sofa, the ring digging into his fist. What now? You think you can take Davenport Capital? You're delusional. But doubt crept in, his mind flashing to Caleb's sly grin, to Ellis's shadowy figure in the photos. Alliances forming against him, orchestrated by the woman he'd underestimated. Imani moved to the door, her hand on the knob. Now, the reversal begins. Sleep well, Julian. Tomorrow the board will hear from me. She left him there, the penthouse suddenly vast and empty, his empire's cracks exposed. As the door clicked shut, Julian stared at the ring, the debt's weight crushing him. The confrontation had ended, but the true battle, the water chess of reversal, was just igniting. The door's echo lingered in the penthouse like a ghost sigh, leaving Julian Davenport alone in the vast, echoing void. He stared at the diamond ring in his palm, its facets mocking him with their cold brilliance. The city lights beyond the windows twinkled indifferently, a sprawling empire that suddenly felt like a house of cards. Settling a debt, he muttered, the words tasting like ash. Imani's calm departure had gutted him, not with tears or hysterics, but with that unshakable resolve, a fire he'd never seen in her eyes. His wife, the quiet ornament, was a force he'd unleashed upon himself. Panic clawed at his throat. He grabbed his phone, dialing lawyers, allies, anyone who could fortify his walls. But deep down he knew, the reversal had begun, a chess game where she'd been plotting moves while he slept. Dawn broke gray and unforgiving over Manhattan, the boardroom at Davenport Capital humming with oblivious energy. Julian arrived early, disheveled in yesterday's suit, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. The executive team assembled, murmuring about quarterly reports, unaware of the storm brewing. He barked orders, demanding updates on the Dubai deal, but his mind raced to Imani, to Kai, to the trust fund she'd built in secret. How much power did she wield? Caleb Vance's name flashed in his thoughts. The ousted partner's cryptic help now reeked of setup. Julian's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling financials. But the first crack appeared. An email from Mr. Ellis, CC'd to the board. Emergency meeting requested. Agenda, corporate restructuring. The conference room filled with tension as board members filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Julian took his seat at the head, projecting authority, but sweat beaded on his brow. Then Ellis entered, silver-haired, impeccably suited, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting like a strategist's armor. Flanked by Caleb Vance, whose smirk cut like a knife, and a team of sharp-suited lawyers. "Gentlemen," Ellis began, his voice measured, "and ladies, we're here to discuss a shift in control." Julian's heart hammered. "What is this? Some joke?" "No joke." Ellis laid it out with clinical precision. Over months, the KII Trust, managed anonymously but now revealed as Imani's, had quietly acquired Davenport Capital's debts through shell companies and insider tips from Caleb. Leverage buyouts, the very tool Julian had wielded like a sword, now turned against him. Caleb leaned forward, eyes gleaming with vindication. "You taught me well, old friend. Remember how you ousted me? Turnabout's fair play." The board gasped as slides projected, stock charts dipping, loans called in, a hostile takeover executed with surgical grace. Imani's fund, swollen from art sales, had bought controlling shares overnight. Julian exploded, slamming the table. "This is fraud. She's my wife. She can't—" But Ellis cut him off, sliding documents across the polished wood. "Mrs. Davenport, Washington, legally, kept her assets separate. No commingling. Your prenup, which you signed without reading, protects her empire." The room spun for Julian. Flashes of their whirlwind courtship, the papers she'd handed him amid champagne toasts. He'd skimmed them, arrogant in his haste. Now they were his noose. The vote was swift, merciless. Ellis, as proxy for the trust, nominated Imani as chairperson. Whispers rippled. Her art's prestige, her story of resilience against corporate greed. The board, sensing the winds of change, and perhaps fearing lawsuits, approved. Julian was demoted, not fired. Oh, the cruelty in that mercy. To head a new division. Community Heritage Restoration, a department dedicated to rebuilding the very small businesses he'd dismantled, starting with Black-owned enterprises like the ones he'd crushed in Charleston. "You'll use your expertise," Ellis said coolly, "to heal what you've broken. Publicly, transparently." Julian's face drained of color, his empire crumbling in real time. "You can't do this," he rasped, but the gavel had fallen. Security escorted him to a smaller office down the hall, his belongings already boxed. Alone, he sank into a chair, the ring still clutched in his pocket like a talisman of loss. Outside, the city pulsed on, indifferent to his fall. Across town, Imani stood in her Brooklyn studio, the kiln's warmth a comforting hum. Mr. Ellis called with the news, his voice triumphant. "It's done. You're in control." She nodded, clay under her nails from a new piece, a phoenix rising from ashes. Caleb had provided the intel, emails, vulnerabilities, fueled by his own grudge, but aligned with her justice. Not destruction, but balance. She'd spare Julian utter ruin, forcing him into atonement instead. "Send him the memo," she instructed. "Restoration starts with Washington Pottery." The days blurred into a whirlwind of transition. Imani assumed the chairperson's role remotely at first, her decisions reshaping the firm. Ethical acquisitions, community investments, profits funneled to marginalized creators. Julian, humbled in his cramped office, stared at files on shattered businesses, family bakeries, artisan shops, echoes of her pain. His first assignment, audit the Charleston land, prepare for repurchase. Rage simmered, but survival demanded compliance. Publicly, he pasted on a smile for press releases, touting the new direction. Privately, he seethed, plotting countersuits that his lawyers deemed futile. Yet in the quiet moments, doubt crept in. Had he truly known her? The woman who'd shared his bed, now wielding power with grace. Imani's debt was settled, not in vengeance's fire, but in healing's light. As she packed sketches for Charleston, Marcus's excited call rang through. "Sis, the blueprints are ready. We're rebuilding." Her heart swelled. The reversal wasn't just corporate. It was personal, a bridge to rebirth. With the pieces in place, she turned toward home. Not the penthouse, but the soil of her ancestors. The legacy awaited, stronger than before. Months had slipped by like clay through fingers, each day molding the fragments of shattered lives into something new, resilient. Imani Washington stood on the tarmac at Charleston International Airport, the humid southern air wrapping around her like a long-lost embrace. The sketches she'd packed that fateful night in Manhattan now unfolded in her mind as blueprints of hope. Marcus's voice still echoing from their call. We're rebuilding. The reversal at Davenport Capitol had been the catalyst, not a vengeful blaze, but a controlled burn that cleared the way for growth. As her plane touched down, the soil of her ancestors called her home, the legacy no longer a ghost but a living promise. Vaitang Sao, in the bustling community center of Queens, New York, Julian Davenport stood before a skeptical audience of local entrepreneurs, his once impeccable suit now slightly rumpled, his posture humbled by the weight of atonement. At 35, he looked older, the sharp edges of his arrogance softened by forced introspection. The Community Heritage Restoration Department had become his exile, a daily reminder of the empires he'd toppled, now tasked with resurrecting them. Today, he presented a plan for a Latin-owned bakery ravaged by one of his past acquisitions, blueprints for renovation, grants from the firm's redirected profits, and partnerships with local artists. We'll rebuild not just the structure, he said, his voice steady but laced with unfamiliar sincerity, but the heart of what was lost. The crowd murmured, some nodding warily, others crossing arms in doubt. Julian met their eyes, feeling the sting of judgment he'd once inflicted. No longer the conqueror, he was the servant, each meeting a mirror to his sins. Whispers followed him, the man who fell from grace. But in the quiet of his diminished office, he pored over files, the ring now tucked in a drawer like a relic of folly. The debt was being paid, one brick at a time, and though rage simmered, a reluctant respect for Imani's mercy had begun to take root. Meanwhile, in Charleston, the sun hung high over the reclaimed land where Washington Pottery once stood, now transformed into a beacon of renewal. The air thrummed with anticipation as crowds gathered for the grand reopening. A modern marvel designed by Marcus, his youthful energy at 21 channeled into soaring arches and sunlit studios that blended industrial chic with ancestral warmth. Skylights flooded the space with golden light, walls adorned with murals of coiled clay and flaming kilns, symbols of endurance etched into every beam. Marcus stood at the entrance, his messy hair tamed for the occasion, blueprints rolled under his arm like a victor's scroll. "We did it, Dad," he whispered to Elijah Washington, who sat in his wheelchair nearby, his eyes once dimmed by stroke, now alight with pride. At 57, Elijah gripped his son's hand, the heirloom pin now pinned to his lapel, a full circle of legacy. Imani arrived amid the buzz, her simple sundress flowing like a river of renewal, her long hair waving gently in the breeze. She moved through the crowd with quiet grace, hugging old workers who'd returned, their faces weathered but hopeful. "Miss Imani," one said, tears in his eyes, "you brought us back." She smiled, her heart swelling, not with triumph over Julian, but with the healing of wounds long festered. The ceremony began with a ribbon cutting, Marcus wielding the scissors alongside her, the snip echoing like a chain breaking. Cheers erupted as doors swung open, revealing workshops humming with new wheels, shelves stocked with vibrant clays, and a community gallery showcasing KI pieces. Now openly hers, symbols of rebirth. As dignitaries spoke of cultural preservation, Imani's thoughts drifted to the journey, the gala's humiliation, the studio's secrets, the ring's removal. The reversal had been surgical. Davenport Capital now a force for good under her chairmanship. Profits seeding initiatives like this. Julian's demotion ensured he faced the human cost of his greed, rebuilding bakeries in Queens, artisan shops in Harlem. Each project a step toward redemption, if he chose it. Caleb Vance had vanished into his own ventures, his grudge sated by the coup's success, while Mr. Ellis remained her steadfast advisor, his wisdom the glue holding the new empire together. The highlight came in the afternoon, Imani's first class in the sun-drenched studio, a group of wide-eyed children from the neighborhood, black, brown, eager hands diving into clay. "Feel the earth," she instructed, her voice warm as the kiln's glow. It's not just mud, it's stories waiting to be shaped. A little girl with braids molded a lopsided bowl, giggling as it wobbled. Like you shaped yours back? The child asked innocently. Imani nodded, kneeling beside her. Exactly. I lost mine once, but I reclaimed it. You can too. The children listened, rapt, as she demonstrated coiling techniques passed down from her great-grandmother, blending them with modern twists. Marcus watched from the doorway, sketching expansions, his dreams no longer deferred. Elijah wheeled closer, his frail hand touching a finished piece, a vase etched with adinkra symbols for faith. Imani, he rasped, pride choking his words. You've given us more than pottery. You've given us ourselves. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of rebirth, Imani stepped outside, the soil crunching under her feet like a welcome. The debt was settled, not in ruins, but in restoration. Julian's world had inverted, forcing him to serve where he'd once conquered, a poetic justice that healed without destroying. For Imani, the true legacy wasn't the firm or the studio. It was her reclaimed self, the artist, the avenger, the woman of unyielding faith. No longer lucky, she was whole, her name meaning belief, now a testament to what perseverance forged. The kiln of her soul burned eternally, illuminating a path for generations. Charleston breathed again, and so did she. As the sun sets on Imani's triumph, her legacy reborn from clay and fire, we hope this story of resilience and justice sparks something in you. What did you feel as Imani turned the tables? Share your thoughts below. Where are you listening from? And what moved you most? Thank you for joining us on this journey of reclamation, for staying until the final stroke of her masterpiece. Your support keeps these stories alive, so hit that subscribe button
And that
join
wraps
us
up
next
today's
time
story.
for another
Now we
tale
want
of
to hear
courage
from
and
you.
reckoning. Until
Where are you
then,
watching
keep
from?
shaping your own legacy.
Drop your
See
city
you soon.
or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.